conférence midi sur la profession comptable et la responsabilité sociale des entreprises. As specified in the announcement for this event, the conference will be held in English exceptionally today. My name is Marion Briveau, and I am responsible for the Public Ethics, Organizational Ethics, and Professional Ethics branch of the Institute of Applied Ethics at Laval University, called IDEA. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all today to this conference on the accounting profession, corporate social responsibility, and ethics. I'd like to thank the Center for Economic Law Study, the CD in French, for sponsoring this event. Charles Shaw, who is a professor of sustainability accounting at Schulich School of Business at York University, and who currently serves as a co-editor of the Journal of Business Ethics, and whose biography you can find on the website of the Institute of Applied Ethics, will now introduce our guest speakers, Jacob Leonard and Robin Roberts, both from the University of Central Florida. I wish you all a very stimulating conference.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Marion, for organizing this, for inviting us. Yes, my name is Charles Cho. I will, as Marion mentioned, introduce the speakers, but also the discussant and the chair of the conference. So first, by alphabetical order, we have Jacob Leonard, who is currently a doctoral candidate at the Dixon School of Accounting at the University of Central Florida. I believe he's almost to be done, almost a doctor soon. I got that information recently. He works on social environmental accounting and corporate social responsibility, specifically on controversial industries. We have next Robin Roberts, who is a professor of accounting and the Al and Nancy Burnett Eminent Scholar at the University of Central Florida. Robin is actually a Jacob supervisor, and just bracket, he was mine too. So we are a bit of family reunion here. So Robin works on also social accounting and corporate social responsibility, but also in terms of regulations. He has published extensively, and he also served as editor of journal Accounting Public Interest, and currently he just actually stepped down, but he served for a number of years as a council member of the Center for Social and Environmental Accounting Research. We have our moderator, Michelle Rodrigue, who is a virtual local professor, Université Laval. She's from your area, so graduated from Concordia University, currently professor at Laval in accounting, also work on social and environmental accounting, also interested in questions relating stakeholder relations and communications. Michelle is a CPA CA in Canada and currently a member of the Center for Social and Environmental Accounting Research as well, and editor of Social and Environmental Accounting Journal. And last but not least, we have Ivan Chuturian, also professor at Laval, but this time we will switch department because we have, he's from the law faculty, and we are welcoming him in this discussion because he also works in topics such as social responsibility from a legal perspective. He is the co-director of, I will say it in French because I don't want to mess up in English, Centre d'études en droit économique, and also co-founding member of the Laboratoire interdisciplinaire de la responsabilité sociale des entreprises. So he has also published extensively, and he will be the discussant of this session. So I would also like to take a few minutes to introduce how, kind of discuss how this came about. Marion Briveau and I, we have been invited to co-edit and coordinate a handbook, the Research Handbook on Accounting and Ethics. And through that, we have, I'm going to show you first what the table of contents, which is now, as we speak, being edited and being, I guess, printed soon. The content is here, as you can see on your screen. We have 4 parts: accounting, profession, and ethics in society. And you can see different topics, different authors. One of which here, of course, is the chapter that Jacob and Robin will talk about: accounting profession, CSR, and ethics. We have a second part deal with more specific discipline-specific accounting specialties auditing, internal auditing, tax, management control, artificial intelligence, and corporate governance, fraud, and also more disengagement, fraud accounting. The third part is accounting ethics around the world. So we go quite broad and global to get global perspectives on accounting ethics in countries in Africa, also in Asia, in Hong Kong, in Macau, in China, and also in Eastern Europe. And last but not least, we also have a part on disciplines that are outside accounting. We have very embracing interdisciplinarity, and we have asked authors to write on small business, small enterprises, and also from the marketing field. And we also have a practitioner perspective. So this book, we believe that will be very useful for instructors, policymakers, regulators, because it does really bring some a wide range of perspective, globally speaking, and also from a disciplinary perspective. So this is how we had the idea that, okay, because we have this question of is ethics CSR or is it CSR ethics? How are they related? How are they not related? So Robin and Jacob did a fantastic job in the chapter to explain that, and that's what the topic will be about. And then Ivan will come into the discussion to add also his perspective from law. So I think that was my job. I felt 6 minutes or less. And now I guess I will pass into Michelle, who will chair the session and moderate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, right on time. Excellent introduction. So, hello everyone, and thank you for attending. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir de vous accueillir. So I'm just going to set the ground rules for the event, and then I'm going to leave our guest speakers to entertain us. So all the questions that you will have, we ask that you ask at the end of the presentation, in fact, at the end of the discussion. So after Ivan will be done, we will take all questions. If you have a burning questions that you're afraid you're going to forget, just put it in the chat, and we'll make sure to ask it at the end of both the presentation and discussion. I'm very happy to translate any question that will be asked in French, so don't hesitate to ask a question either in English or French, no problem at all. So Jacob and Robin will have 30 minutes to present their work, and then Ivan will follow with a more or less 20 minutes discussion, and I will be the one making sure that they stick to their time so that we have plenty of time for the discussion. So over to you, Jacob and Robin, and thanks again for being with us today.
I'll share the screen. I guess I'll start.
Sure.
So thank you for inviting us. I always like an opportunity to talk about these things. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So this was the title of the chapter, The Accounting Profession, Corporate Social Responsibility and Ethics. We start the chapter giving a little bit of historical context. So I'm going to explain some of that to you. So when we think of businesses, historically, all the way from the Hellenic Greek to American colonialism, there is this predominant societal belief that the role of business was to serve a public interest. That's why businesses existed. And a slight caveat here is, I'm not saying these were great different societies, like lots of them had slaves and stuff, and so their perspective of who the public they were serving, is varied. But there was just a strong belief that if it wasn't serving the public interest, a business shouldn't exist. And so as the charters of incorporation were created in more modern society, that was a strong part of those charters of incorporation, that the company needed to serve a public interest. If they didn't, they would revoke the charters of incorporation. You saw in the Industrial Revolution is when that started to flip. And as this author had so succinctly put it, a new ethic which glorified wealth as an absolute virtue and apothesized the business. And so they just started to believe that owning a business and making money was the point of a business. The courts were even beginning to rule that that private injury and personal damage must be expected as a populous and prosperous country was being developed. And all of this then kind of led up to the Great Depression. And there is when you see a reversal of all of this, where due to regulatory intervention, there's some discussion of what is an actual corporation's social responsibility. You saw like minimum wage requirements, collective bargaining protection, and information disclosure oversight. And so then as CSR was becoming a bigger thing people were discussing, there's a slight history to what happened here. So prior to the 1950s, it's generally just philanthropy, building colleges, museums, those sorts of things. So the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, Carnegie, those sorts of names, and the philanthropy they would do. In the 1950s to the 1960s, you start to see those social obligations expand to the welfare of workers in the local communities. So in this period, you're seeing the rise of like labor unions. It's when they really took off, was in this period of time. The 1970s is when you're seeing those social movements around civil rights, some about pollution. This is when like the EPA, Earth Day, OSHA, all of those things were created during this period of time. And so there was a lot of pressure that somebody needs to intervene on what companies are doing. The 1980s, you don't see much change with actually what companies are doing, but the academics are starting to study what is a corporation's social responsibility. So some names that are fairly seminal to this work: Ackerman, Sethi, and Federick. In the 1990s, there's like stagnation or maybe even a reversal of progress with like Reagan and Thatcher and their deregulation policies around businesses. So corporations are allowed a bit more leniency in what they're allowed to do. And then now to the 21st century is when we're seeing some of the greatest societal pressure from all sorts of stakeholders, investors, consumers, and NGOs, for corporations to better address this impact they're having on the environment and society. And so through all of this, some different theories about a corporation's CSR are developed. We use this specific, I don't know how to pronounce their names, but this specific grouping of these theories. There are a few different ones. They're all roughly the same, but this one included 4 instead of 3. And so we thought it better represented the different approaches academics take to thinking, what is CSR? What is the responsibility of a corporation? So the first group is the instrumental group. It's probably the most dominant one in any research. And it assumes that the business exists to generate wealth, and CSR is going to be a tool to maximize shareholder wealth. That if it's maximizing wealth, you do CSR. If it's not, you don't do it. The political group assumes businesses are social institutions that use CSR to create soft laws. And so this research can, well, all of them can be either pro-business or they're being very critical of this stance. But in this political setting, the corporation is often thought of as if they will do some sort of social responsibility performance, they can avoid regulation from doing that. Or if they're like a benefit corporation, they might set the standard for what a corporation should be doing. Integrative, this group assumes the businesses are dependent on society for existence. So like legitimacy theory it falls into this category. So companies respond to the social values in society. They need society to accept them. And so if society wants them to address pollution or civil rights or those sorts of things, then they need to, because that's how they exist. And then the last group is the ethical group. And this is where you see the least amount of research, at least in business, taking an explicit like ethical stance and then trying to evaluate how should a business make decisions due to ethical obligations. And so this is kind of then what we focus on and how research can more explicitly take this position.
Hi, then I get to take over with a few slides as well. Thanks, Jacob. And just a quick thank you to Marion and Laval and Charles and Yvonne and all of you that are out there in the audience. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. So Jacob was talking about corporate social responsibility really as activities that a company undertakes to sort of either legitimize their stance in society or to help manage their stakeholders' interests. And the slide that I have up that we're going to start talking about is not, so when you have corporate social responsibility performance, when you want to report that to others, then that's where accounting comes in. And accounting is the mechanism by which we report the activities outside of the organization usually. And this is something that accountants dabbled in the 70s for a little bit, and we have up a seminal paper by Ramanathan in 1976. I think maybe 3 or 4 of us were born before 1976. I don't know. So it's been around quite a while. And he talks about, we have a quote there about selecting firm level social performance variables, measures, measurement procedures. So what Ramanathan was doing was taking the traditional way of thinking about accounting as a stewardship function and expanding the reporting that a company makes to outsiders. It's really an accountability mechanism. Now, the bottom half of that slide talks about efforts to try to standardize this accounting and reporting. So when people look across companies, there's some comparability in the way in which the accounting is done. And you can see that there's a laundry list, is what I would say, of different efforts. So as opposed to strictly financial accounting, where there are maybe 1 or 2 standard setters that are accepted worldwide, there is sort of an alphabet soup, some people say, of reporting efforts. And you can see some of these, the International Organization for Standardization, 26,000. Then I'll just sort of read some of these just so you can get a flavor for, how many players there are in this field of trying to standardize reporting. Accountability International, the Prince's Accountability Project, that's Prince Charles led that effort. Integrated Reporting Council, Triple Bottom Line Reporting, Global Reporting Initiative, Carbon Disclosure Project, on and on and on. And so what we've seen is really not just a competition of standard setters, but a competition of ideas about what these social responsibilities of business are, and therefore how to measure and report on the relevant social responsibilities. So I think Jacob's in charge of changing the slide. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Jacob. So what I was leading into was this particular slide, which says what these CSR reporting frameworks, that is how we account for corporate social responsibility activities, are built on different theoretical foundations and leads to what the DeCole, Enriques, and Sarasvathy paper calls a reporting paradox. So while standards have traditionally been developed to deal with technical issues, there are methodological problems when you try to define and codify social and ethical issues. So 2 of the major sort of standard setting organizations, and these are not legally binding standard setters, these are private standard setters who are trying to get legitimized and used to compete to be the standard setter of choice for companies. And 2 of the main ones are GRI, which is the Global Reporting Initiative. And you can see the theoretical foundation or sort of basis for their standards and how they write their standards. Like the GRI exists to help organizations be transparent and take responsibility for their impacts in a way that can create a sustainable future. So you can see that this GRI perspective is one that's sort of the company and looking outward. Like the company is reporting on how they are influencing different aspects of social and environmental issues. The SASB, which is short for the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, was a more narrowly defined standard setter that focused on financial impacts as it relates to investors. And when the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board talks about sustainability, you can say sustainability of what? For SASB, it's really the sustainability of the business. It's business sustainability. And so it looks at reporting mainly to investors on how the company that's doing the reporting is managing their environmental, social, and governance risks. And that's what we'll move to talk to a little bit more, right? So as some of the standard setters became really more popular in mainstream finance, the pressures for reporting tended to shift towards the demands or needs of mainstream investment groups. So it used to be that corporate social responsibility activities were reported on really to help social responsibility investments take place. So there were things like negative screening, which means if a company does some activities that are seen as unethical, then socially responsible investing would avoid investing in those kind of stocks. But this shift from CSR to ESG is, it's not just a change in letters, it's really a change in terminology. It is a change in the theoretical foundations of corporate social responsibility reporting. So as you can see in this slide, it's a shift away from what we would call general normative views of social responsibilities to environmental, social, and governance performance from the company perspective towards investors. And you can see the slide there says a focus on the measurable, quantifiable criterion of a corporation's view. And this is key. It's financially, material, sustainable, and social impact. Now, this push for quantifiable measures and increased disclosures and independence assurance has reinforced the role of accountants in social accounting. So we had Ramanathan starting us in 1976. There was sort of the same lull that Jacob was talking about in terms of interest in social responsibility and interest in social responsibility accounting, both in practice and in academic work. And just in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, there's been a resurgence of interest that's been pushed mainly by issues of climate change and issues of some human rights issues and some globalization issues that have come along. So we can go to the next slide, I think. And so the question then becomes, there's a mandate through a lot of legislation for the accounting profession to perform accounting services. So I believe like mainly auditing, auditors are usually certified. I think we've mentioned people here who have different kinds of certifications. So you have to be in the United States a certified public accountant to audit financial statements. So there's been not just a competition among accountants to develop ways to report and audit on corporate social responsibilities. There's also been a competition across professions. So some industrial engineers think they can report on environmental issues better than accountants can. And so what we did in this chapter was say, well, okay, what are the attributes of a profession that can lend itself to having accountants perform this service of reporting, measuring and reporting on corporate social responsibilities? And so we just talk about what a profession is: a specialized body of knowledge, a commitment to a social purpose. We think about that as being a public interest mandate or imperative, the ability to self-regulate, and the ability to be recognized as a profession of stature. With my students, I like to think about, I'll give them an example of a pharmacist where, if you'll just step back a little bit, you go to a pharmacist, you hand them a little piece of paper with some scribbles on it. The next thing you know, the pharmacist hands you a bottle of pills. And what do you do with those pills? You actually just sort of put them in your mouth and swallow them, and there's a lot of trust that's embedded in that. And so in the accounting profession, we're also trying to make sure we can establish that kind of trust and can become, a provider of choice for CSR reporting and measurement. So when we ask, can accountants do this? I think I've covered this slide pretty well. What accountants do is measure, disclose, and assure. And we're starting to see curriculum designed for sustainability accounting as well. So we're trying to codify some of that into curriculums. I think it's an exciting opportunity for the accounting profession to serve the public interest beyond just investors. So in my ethics class that I teach, I also try to challenge my students to think about the professional aspects of accounting. And I'll usually do it like this. I'll say, medical doctors heal the sick, attorneys administer justice, accountants, what is it they do? You know, and there's usually a pause because we haven't really exactly sorted out, you know, how our public interest mandate is best met. And so I think that the role of the accounting profession in measuring, disclosing, and assuring CSR reporting can also be a way to add to our public interest responsibilities.
And so then when we try to connect all of this to ethics, starting with just ethics and accounting, this is a thing that is studied, as Robin had mentioned. There's classes on it. Almost all universities have a class on accounting ethics. But ethics in accounting is often a very specific thing, and they use mainly two ethical theories. You probably know them better than I do, and this is an oversimplification, but utilitarian ethics, where the ethical action is the one that provides the most good for the most amount of people, or deontological ethics, where the ethical action is not determined by the consequence, but the adherence to established rules, duties, rules, and principles. So in financial accounting, when we're assessing like the ethical action of an accountant, if there are clear rules and standards that have been established, it's usually deontological ethics. The ethical action would be the one that adheres to those rules and standards. If there are no standards, or it's maybe more gray, it often will turn to this idea of utilitarian ethics. And so the accountant should do the thing that is most in line with kind of protecting the public interest. And so when we think of that in the context of CSR, and how accountants should assess ethics when they are using their professional like status to either measure, disclose, or assure CSR, there's all sorts of kind of ethical issues that I think come up. And so I specifically use this example, like there's a decent amount of research in accounting on environmental issues because this is an easier one to measure. Science has given us measures of carbon emissions, those sorts of things. And so the thing that I am just more interested in is the idea of like, well, are we going to measure human suffering, those sorts of things? And I just think that brings up a lot of like ethical issues. So the example that ended up in the chapter is like Nestle Mars, the cacao beans. So in West Africa, there's a lot of structural poverty and child labor in the cacao industry. So Nestle and Mars don't own these companies, but it is part of their supply chain, and their desire for cheap raw materials, drives structural poverty and child labor. So in their sustainability report, where they're trying to disclose and kind of measure their impact on human rights, these are the three things that are listed. They carry out 6 human rights impact assessments. They have a functioning governance structure in place to look after human rights, and they train all of their employees on human rights. And so coming from kind of that instrumental theory of CSR, accounting's role would really just be to measure the financial costs and benefits of violating human rights, and you sort of assess it based on this financial cost. But if we're going to think about it from an ethical perspective, I just think there's lots of questions. Just can we measure something like human rights violations by the number of employees who are trained? Does this satisfy a requirement for complete accounts? So in accounting, there's a general belief or a standard that you're going to give a complete account of something. So if you're going to disclose revenues, you disclose expenses, those two correlate. And really in their sustainability report, they're only reporting what they see as positive impacts in the human rights area, where they are also having all sorts of negative impacts. So in my mind, it's like disclosing revenue without disclosing expenses. And then if we get to the point that accountants would need to be like measuring the cost of human suffering or the benefit of human suffering, can we ever start to equate those two things? Do the thousands of individuals in West Africa who are subjected to child labor and structural poverty, do they outweigh the millions who enjoy chocolate? Can we even just measure the cost of human suffering and the benefit of the pleasure of eating chocolate? So there's just sort of these endless ethical questions that I think exist when we're going to assess the accountant's role in CSR. And so the challenges that exist if accounting researchers are going to take this on to study ethics and CSR. So the first challenge that we identify is that accounting researchers need to make an explicit decision to study CSR from an ethical perspective. In research, a lot of times, just by studying CSR, researchers think they have studied an ethical issue, but they don't take kind of an explicit ethical stance. But there's some issues here if a researcher is going to do that. So ethical theories are inherently normative. And already in accounting research, there's not a lot of normative accounting research. And this paper, I think, puts it well as to why. So if we're going to make claims about how accounting should be done, there are redistributional consequences. And so he claims that there needs to be some sort of welfare function. There's something you have to assess that this is better than the alternative. And that social welfare function doesn't exist in accounting currently. So what he ends up doing, and this is all just for accounting, like traditional accounting, this is not related to CSR, but he takes the FASB framework, which was one of our frameworks for how traditional accounting is done, and pulls out all the things that are necessary to the FASB framework to assess normative accounting research. How should we do it? Is it consistent? Is it understandable? Or is it more consistent? Is it more understandable? Is it more relevant? And so that's a potential way that researchers could approach this issue, is trying to take these same criteria and attach them to CSR as we assess how accountants should account for CSR. We could relate it to those sorts of things. Researchers could try to just create a social welfare function. That might be what we need to do. But there are sort of philosophical issues with creating normative accounting research that maybe needs to be addressed first. Our second challenge that we identify is using an ethical theory that matches with the research question. So different theories have different ethical underpinnings. So just one example is using like stakeholder theory. So to contrast it with the idea of a company exists to make money for their shareholders, stakeholder theory says that a company has all sorts of stakeholders and should be making decisions based on all of these stakeholders. So instrumental stakeholder theory really just takes the perspective that those other stakeholders are just a means to an end. You sort of satisfy your other stakeholders so that your shareholders can make money. Intrinsic stakeholder theory takes a more ethical stance on this, that every stakeholder has intrinsic value and we need to assess each of them accordingly. And then even further, you could use like feminist stakeholder theory, which takes feminist ethics and applies it to stakeholder theory. And so just making sure that the theory that a researcher uses is appropriate. This also kind of leads to other challenges where there are lots of ethical theories and they might end up conflicting with each other. And so how you just address the idea that these ethical, like how do you choose which ethical theory? And so I found this table on ethical approaches, and I thought it's fairly useful for somebody to use in trying to decide how they're going to approach studying ethics. And it goes from really not making any choices, like a descriptive one. You just kind of use the theory to highlight the situation, and you just kind of describe the situation. Either trying to combine the theory, maybe you'll find that they don't actually conflict, or at certain important points, they don't conflict. Or you just pick one. That's choose, is just pick a theory and move on with your research. Or the interactive approach where not only does the theory inform the situation, but you can try to use like case studies to better inform actually the ethical theory on what it does state. So that is a suggestion on how researchers could approach this challenge.
Yeah, there's some specific challenges for researchers who are looking at corporate social performance, or what we might call ESG performance. And these challenges have to do with the large scale databases that have been developed to measure and report on environmental, social, and governance performance. So you can see here where I talked about ratings provide an assessment of those ESG financially material risks, not really a normative view of social and environmental performance. And so when we talk about ESG ratings measuring financially material risk, I can give you just a very short example of a rating agency analyst that I talked with who said, well, when a company is polluting, they used to get a poor rating for their environmental performance. Now the question is their polluting raising a risk of some sort of fine or some sort of litigation or some sort of negative financial outcome? And if the answer to that question is no, they still get a good rating on their environmental performance based on risk management, not based on some normative idea of, degradation towards the environment or causing negative outcomes or externalities. So I think it's important to know what the ESG rating is measuring. And a lot of that can happen, I think, if you dig down deep and maybe do some hand collecting of data to proxy for those environmental measurements. And so I think we've come to the end of our part of the discussion. I think I have maybe 3 minutes to spare. So, I think we've, I hope, done a good job of explaining what our chapter was about. We've tried to talk about these links between corporate social responsibility, ethics, and our accounting profession. And attention is, I think in the chapters given to financial markets and how they've tried to recast ESG performance away from normative aspects of performance to more financially material risks. So we'd like to encourage people to have ethics-centered research. And with that, we'll turn it back over to Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob and Robin, for a very interesting talk. I think that you have some gems in there that I made note of, and we'll come back to this during the Q&A. But for now, I will ask Yvan to come to the floor, take the floor and discuss your presentation. So Yvan will have 20 minutes for his talk.
Okay, thank you, Michel. Merci, Michel. So thank you very much, Jacob and Robin. The presentation was very interesting, and thank you to Professor Shaw to be present. Your presentation was really interesting. It showed the challenges posed by societal issues to reporting and I think to numbers, les chiffres. To answer that societal issues are properly managed, no, we must check. We must check what corporations are doing. And it's complicated. And ethics calls for verifying the behavior of companies. And there is a strong question. How can corporations be responsible if we do not know what they do and if what they say is true? We have two crucial challenges now. For lawyer, and perhaps I speak to the student assistants here. I would remind something. There is books, works, papers about these topics. Perhaps Alain Supiot, La gouvernance par les nombres, Samuel Jubé, about history of accounting, Marina Taylor Jennifer Bardi about the social accountability, and perhaps an oldest author, René Savatier, which was the first lawyer to speak about social accountability. Some have already called for caution about the symbolism of numbers and the importance for numbers to integrate the social world. So for students, I invite you to rediscover these works. It's very fascinating. For the discussion, I think I will focus on hearing our speakers, not me. So the 20 minutes are for you, Jacob and Robin, and perhaps Charles too, and Michel or Mario. I have a lot of questions, but I will focus on 3 questions. I have a new question here. The first question is, I understand that work remains to be done. And so, for you, what would be the first solution you would recommend facilitating the opening of the accounting profession to ethics? What is for you the first avenue here to promote? This is my first question. My second question, should we believe in the instruments for measuring the non-financial performance of corporation that currently exist? If I understand you, a good performance of these instruments does not mean that corporation is ethical. And I think it's a problem for a lawyer, but for everyone who are interested in CSR and social performance. And listening to you, I have an additional question. Jacob, you presented 4 theories of CSR. And so what becomes a vision of Donaldson and Preston? It is a classical of literature about CSR, but what is the future of Donaldson and Preston classification of CSR theories? I am curious because when I speak to my student, I present the Donaldson and Preston vision about CSR. So this is my 3 questions. It's for you, dear speakers.
Robin, Jacob, who would like to go?
I'll take a shot at the first question. How's that? And then we can, is that okay, Jacob? Yeah, okay. So thank you so much, Yvonne. I appreciate your willingness to come on and be a part of this session. Thank you. You have really good questions that are been puzzling, I think, a lot of people who do CSR accounting research for quite a while. And part of my research also has to do with professional regulation and the role of professional regulation in helping accounting meet its public interest obligations. So I think, how do we bring ethical accountants into the profession? One thing would be to prioritize sort of a socialization selection process where we privilege ethical sensitivity in our selection of who's going to be an accountant. I know that there's been, well, I don't know, it probably made the news around the world that Ernst & Young, one of the largest accounting firms in the world, just had I believe it was a $120 million fine because their employees were cheating on the ethics exam that allows them to become certified. So one thing would be weed out those that that make explicit efforts to be unethical, I think, is one thing. I believe that we have a required course in our curriculum, and I know you can't put ethics in a box, but I think that education has a real important role to play in bringing out the importance of ethics in accounting programs. I think undergraduate programs especially are very technical. You learn, you know, the 4 different ways to account for purchases, returns, and allowances, but you don't understand the core ethical issues that are embedded in the way accounting works. Accounting is socially constructed, it's political, it has ethical dimensions embedded at its core, and I think that underlying ethical theories need to be brought out more in our curriculum. So that'd be my initial thoughts. So did that help answer anything?
Yes.
Yeah. Anything to add, Jacob?
I would just add also on the side of like researching this sort of thing. I would think the first main issue that exists is the fact that ethical theories are normative, and like just accounting researchers don't seem to like normative claims, like where our research just doesn't make normative claims generally. And so I don't think the academic like literature is very open to those sorts of things that would be making these normative claims about what a company should be doing. And so I think that's the first thing that somehow we have to address, that like, yeah, we as researchers, we can say what we should be doing, and this comes from our ethical like evaluation of what humans should be doing. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, one thing in the academic accounting discipline, they tend, whether it's behavioral research or archival research, to lean on economic theories more than anything else. And the economic theories produce a language that sort of distances behaviors from ethical considerations, you know. So I know that there's a lot of research on earnings management, which is the deliberate attempt to make earnings look better than they do. And the research finds what they'll call, instead of saying the managers lie or the managers deceive, they call it a persistent optimistic bias, is the language that they use. So it sort of, you know, is a way, I think, to obfuscate the ethical aspects of that kind of decision making. Okay. Should we go to question 2? Is that what I'm supposed to do next? Okay. Do you want to start on that one, Jacob, or you want me to?
Would you like a reminder of the second question? I took note for you. I took notes for you, gentlemen. So second question was, should we believe in the instrument for measuring CSR performance, given that from your talk, we can understand that having a good performance doesn't mean that the performance is ethical?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start. One thing is that there are different ways to think about environmental, social, and governance performance, okay? And as we pointed out, the different standard setters take different theoretical perspectives on that. So there are 2 questions to me. One is, are the standard setting processes for reporting reflecting an ethical point of view? And then are they being followed in the execution of the reporting itself? And I think we're finding problems with both of those. Some of the standard setters are focusing on ESG risk management techniques as opposed to performance. And then when we see the reporting, we also have a big completeness problem because it's voluntary reporting. So there's been work done on impression management techniques. There's work done on trying to, greenwash performance. And so I would say I'm suspicious of the reporting. I would also say that now we have these ESG ratings, and you have third parties that are rating performance, and those are also changing as well. And one thing that it's producing is there's a literature on reactivity or reactive conformance. And that is, as you set up these standards or these ratings, companies then try to game the metrics, and do what they can to get the highest rating they can get without maybe changing the substantive nature of their performance itself. So those would be my comments.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is basically just the same thing. And like, as someone who's evaluating these ratings, it would depend on what you think they represent. You know, if you just need them for your assessment of the value of this company, they probably are fairly good to help you assess the value of this company. If what you were wanting to know is, does this tell you if this is a good company or a bad company? Yeah, they don't seem to correlate great with anything that you as like an individual who is looking for like an ethical company. They don't really correlate to those sorts of things. So my little like asterisk next to that would just be, what are you as an individual looking for in them on how to answer that question. And then the question that you had put in the chat that says for me,
Jacob, if you don't mind, this is a question that we'll keep for the Q&A. We would like you and Robin to answer Ivan's last and third question before we do that. I
think he just wrote it in the chat box. I was just referring to, like, I can see it says for me.
Yeah, there it is now. Yeah.
Oh, that isn't his. I thought it was his. Sorry. Wait, so I messed up the.
Let me handle the chat, dear. Let me do that for you.
So can you reiterate the third question for me?
I can do that. I think that Ivan was mentioning how you want to do it yourself, Ivan? Would you like me to?
Yeah, it's about the Donaldson and Preston vision of theories about CSR. So what is the futures of this theory? Because Donaldson and Preston have another classification, normative, instrumental, and one more. But you present in another vision of the classification of CSR theories, and it's very interesting for CSR and a lawyer perspective. So, what becomes the vision of Donaldson and Preston?
Well, I don't remember Donaldson and Preston right off the top of my head, but I think that I just Googled it over here, right? And they talk about normative, instrumental, and descriptive is the other one, right? And so I think that ties into, well, the instrumental theory is mentioned. The descriptive is really trying to just discuss what is, right? I mean, it's not about what should be or anything like that. So it's just trying to describe the actions that a company takes towards stakeholders. And I see the normative one is sort of gets translated later into what they'll call intrinsic stakeholder theory. And I think those match pretty well together. Stakeholder theory has gone through a lot of iterations over time. And I think that there's still room for stakeholder theory research in accounting and stakeholder reporting, but it's there's some other ethical theories we could look at as well. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's off the cuff what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything more to add to that.
Mm-hmm. I'll mention that the political CSR is a rather new theory with Palazzo and Shearer, I believe, are the ones that wrote that paper and really talk about corporate social responsibility in, I'd say, a pretty aspirational way, actually, a way in which companies are seen as good faith actors in settings where there's a lot of sort of turmoil and disruption, and where they can, like you'll find, in underdeveloped countries, you'll find where companies are building elementary schools and things like that, and so they're taking over what we traditionally think of as responsibilities of the state. And so it's more of an action-focused look at corporate social responsibility in public-private partnerships and things like that. Okay.
I think Ivan wants to know if he should just give up reading Donaldson and Preston or not. He wants someone to take some reading off his list, I guess.
It's a classic, you know, it is, yes. Yeah.
All right, so Ivan, would you like to add something, some kind of reply or conclusion to this part?
Perhaps we have a lot of questions and reactions on chat, so perhaps we can use this question to continue our discussion.
Let's do this then. Thank you, Ivan, first for getting Robin and Jacob to speak a bit more about their views and their thoughts related to the chapter. I think that we heard very interesting insights. I don't know about you all in the audience, but I mean, I took some notes here about how the public interest of the accounting profession include the responsibility of measuring, reporting, and auditing on CSR, and the many ethical questions that are raised by the measurement and reporting of social issues like human rights. I think Jacob said something like, there are endless ethical questions in assessing accounting's ethical role in CSR. So I guess we are at the point where we have a nice opportunity to reflect and engage more on some of these thoughts. So we can start. We have 2 questions in the chat, so we can start with that. And then